Today we have an exciting guest. His name is Hussein Fazal, my previous boss at AdParlor, currently CEO at SnapTravel. Hussein, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you have an amazing track record. You've grown AdParlor to a run rate of $100 million. You exited to AdKnowledge in 2011. You went on to start SnapTravel, raised just recently a cool $8 million for seed round. It's amazing. Congrats.
Thank you.
I think the first question I'd love to ask you would be really about idea generation. So
Sure.
I think a lot of new entrepreneurs struggle always with figuring out what they should be pursuing.
Yep.
So, and a lot of the times, first company just kind of falls in people's laps. So as a second-time founder, I'd love to understand, how did you go through that second idea generation process, already knowing what you've learned from AdParlor?
Sure, yeah, so that's a great question. So myself and my co-founder, Henry, we actually took a very kind of engineering systematic approach to it. What we did is we used a book called Running Lean by Ash Maurya, which is kind of a version of just the lean methodology. And essentially it allows us to iterate and test ideas very, very fast. So quick example, let's say you want to test a B2B idea, you throw up a quick landing page, you run some email campaigns to try and get people to that landing page, and you see if they sign up. B2C sort of similar, except you're buying Facebook ads and you're buying Google ads. So put up a landing page, drive traffic to it, and see how people respond. It also involves a lot of customer interviews, especially on the B2B side. So let's say you had an idea for an advertising startup, you would go reach out to a whole bunch of advertising executives and talk to them about it. And the way we did it, typically if you reach out to someone and you say, hey, I have a business idea, can you help me out? They're not going to be so responsive to that. So what we did is we asked for what their pain points were. So we'd reach out to people and we'd say, hey, I'm a repeat tech entrepreneur. Here's what I've done before, create some legitimacy. And we're looking to help you with your pain points. Would like to understand what that is. And that does get a pretty good response rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people are trying to chase solutions when they're just starting. They're always coming out with, well, what is that thing that I should do, versus thinking of what is the problem that I should be solving, right?
Yeah, exactly. So running lean actually takes you through that process. So the first process is identifying problems and pain points. And then once you identify those problems and pain points, then you can go look at potential solutions. And then the good thing is, once you have potential solutions, you've already interviewed people who have given you their problems and pain points, so you can just go take that solution, bring it right back to them and say, hey, would this solve your problem?
Yeah.
Now, the one caveat I would say is we started by doing that, and we ended up coming up with an idea that had a real pain point and had a real solution, but it was actually something we weren't that passionate about, and the industry wasn't that big. So this is before SnapTravel, we had something else going. So on top of doing this very systematic problem solution, always keep in mind the bigger picture, which is, how big is the market? Can this be $1 billion opportunity? And is it something that actually excites you?
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So starting a second company, how is your attitude different about running it versus the first company?
Yeah, so I think with AdParlor, obviously that was my very first business. It was completely bootstrapped. I think we probably spent a lot of time trying to save money, right? And not to say that we overspend or are stupid with money now, but a lot of things where you put a little bit of money into it and it drives a lot more results a lot faster, right? So we think a lot more about what we can outsource. Customer service you can outsource potentially, some development, certain tasks you can outsource, and just being able to spend money where it makes sense to allow you to move faster.
Yeah, so kind of jumping ahead on this topic
Sure.
of giving up equity, very curious, and I think that's generally a pretty pressing question for a lot of founders, of understanding where to find that balance of giving up control when you're raising equity financing, and having enough cash in the bank to continue growing.
Yeah.
So how your experience at SnapTravel is different from that of AdParlor, and why did you decide to take a different route this time?
Yeah, sure. So with AdParlor, what we were doing is every time we had to hire someone, we first had to make enough revenue and profit to justify hiring that person. So you just naturally end up moving a lot slower. So you end up hiring, one person every month or two, and then you win a big account, and you're like, oh, we have all this money now, we can afford to hire another engineer, and that just doesn't allow you to move that fast. So this time around, with raising money, so it was a 1.2 million seed and then an 8 million Series A. It does allow us to just move a lot faster. So we can go be aggressive, we can invest in technology, we can invest in hiring people in advance without having to first kind of make that money to pay that person.
And what kind of advice would you give to somebody who is, for example, just looking for maybe their seed or Series A? Do you typically recommend people follow the bootstrap route, or do you recommend typically to go after just equity?
I think you should bootstrap for as long as possible until it becomes a hindrance to you, right? I mean, bootstrap teaches you a lot of good techniques. It teaches you to be very kind of effective in the way you do things. It also means that when you do go raise your money, you're going to ideally have some real traction, and you're going to be able to raise at a better valuation and raise more money. So I'd encourage you to bootstrap for as long as possible until you really see that, hey, we have a real business here, we have real traction, we just need more money to kind of put some gas on the fire. That's when you should go and raise money.
So it sounds like before you find that product market fit, don't raise money.
No, definitely don't raise money for product market fit. I mean, there are some people who can, and it is possible, but a lot of times you read these stories in the news and it sounds very glamorous, but likely they gave up 50% of their company to raise that small amount of money, or maybe they're just a really great storyteller. But in most scenarios, before you go and raise money, you should have product market fit, you should have a decent amount of traction, such that it puts you in a good position to raise money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds, it always looks much better on paper when you see these massive funding rounds, but in reality, you never know what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, you never know what happens.
So my other questions would be about the management, how you actually run your companies.
Sure.
So what kind of management lessons have you learned from AdParlor that you decided to implement on day one at SnapTravel?
Sure. So I think at AdParlor, again, it was very kind of ad hoc. One of the things that we didn't do a great job of is even just giving good employee feedback, and for example doing like employee one-on-ones, right? It was something that was very ad hoc, and we kind of sync up with people as necessary. I think we're a bit more structured at SnapTravel in terms of doing bi-weekly one-on-ones, doing regular performance reviews, and I think that's really important for the employee, and the employees really value that time to be able to sit down with their boss and really understand what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, and what they can improve on. And we have been a lot better at setting goals as well. So setting OKRs, so like whether it's monthly goals or quarterly goals, and that really gives the employee something to work towards. And then when they come to their one-on-one, they can say, hey, I hit this and this, let's try and do a stretch goal. So I think we've been a lot more structured with giving employees feedback.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies, us included, it took us some time to get through that startup mentality, and when you start realizing that there's a lot of things you could be implementing on day one and make it, you can continue moving fast, but having that structure on how you operate with the team members, how you execute is very important.
Sure, yeah, and you just want to make sure that every employee knows, what success means to them, right? If they don't know what success means to them, then they end up, going off on all these tangents. But if they know the definition of success in their role, then that really helps keep them focused and keeps them excited.
To your earlier point about doing too many things, I think everybody's notorious for that.
Yeah.
So how are there any qualitative or quantitative frameworks that you look at to try to understand which line of business you should be focusing on? I think what I've seen, at least from other companies, is that they don't maximize the potential of just one product that they start with. They feel like they hit the ceiling and they jump onto something new without trying to optimize that specific distribution channel and try to grow that.
Yeah, I also think that, as odd as it sounds, I think a lot of times that happens around trying to raise money as well. So what happens is you go for fundraising and the investors look at you and say, oh, but you're only in this vertical, you're only in this product. I want you to, have this product. I want you to prove out other verticals. I want you to prove out, other mediums or whatever it is. And I think that's where a lot of that happens. But if you really just stay focused in one area, assuming that it's like a big enough market size, you can do a lot more damage in that one area. So I think obviously it's important to have the bigger vision and to expand where it makes sense. But for as long as you can, and as long as the market size is big enough, you should stay very focused in the area that you're focused in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So kind of on the question of management or leadership,
Yep.
how does the role of a founder change as you go from 0 to 100?
Sure. Yeah. So at the start, especially in the early days, you're pretty much doing everything. So you're, the BD guy, you're the product guy, you're the sales guy, in my case, I luckily have a great co-founder at AdParlor and at SnapTravel. So at least, they've been able to handle most of the technology and the engineering and the development, but you pretty much handle everything but that. And then obviously as you grow, you can hire people to take things over. Like now we have someone great who's handling, most of finance, and we have someone great who's handling, some business development and some product. So you try and kind of have people handle things as much as possible and then give you kind of a more high level strategic view. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting transition. At AdParlor was interesting because I went all the way through to then being acquired and still being kind of part of AdParlor. And by that stage, it was more almost like a consulting role, where I was just going in and kind of helping the senior management team with high-level strategy and consulting. In a way, I was kind of helping employees out and just helping them with their career decisions, what they wanted to do. And then, of course, I would be involved with some of the biggest relationships. So, relationship with Facebook, relationship with our major advertisers. But then that's about it. So everything else you kind of have to hand off.
I would imagine that's a pretty hard moment of being able to give it up for a founder.
Yeah, it's extremely hard, right? Because when you start, you know everything. You know the ins and outs of every single, database query that's running and like everything. But over time, you just need to keep like pulling away. And even if, things aren't done like as well as you may think they'd be done, overall, a lot more work gets done when you can hand things off and and take a step back. My general rule is that for me as a CEO, if there's anything that I'm spending, more than let's say 10 hours a week on, like consistently, like every week, man, I'm spending 10 hours doing some finance reconciliation. Well, guess what? I should probably hire someone to do that because they're going to be able to do that. Obviously, you can give them some other roles to fill up their time, but then you just kind of hand that off and then move away. Yeah.
So how do you grow yourself as a CEO? Definitely the skill set required at the early stage is different from the ones required of a CEO later in the company life cycle. But how do you approach personal growth?
Sure. So I think this time around has been really interesting because we've had investors in the seed round and the A round. They've been super helpful. So they've obviously seen patterns before of companies who have started and grown. So I have been leveraging our investors, Lightbank, B Partners, Inovia, to try and get as much feedback from them as possible, and that's been super helpful. I also spend a lot of time in the Valley. I spend a lot of time in San Francisco. I have a lot of entrepreneur friends, so I spend a lot of time talking to them and getting that direct feedback. I have tried, things like doing online courses and stuff like that. I've never had too much success with that. I don't know that my attention span or my time is there, but I think having like personal one-on-one talks and having specific questions with other entrepreneurs, that really makes a difference.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Couple bonus questions.
Sure.
There's people that work in the B2B, they say maybe oftentimes they say, oh, I wish we had a B2C company. B2C company holds to their head and say, I wish we could run like a B2B company.
Yeah.
You've seen both.
Yeah.
What are some of the can you debunk some of these myths and see where what is it like to be on a B2B going to B2C?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the one thing about B2B I find is that it's a lot more predictable once you have product market fit. So once you have product market fit, you can make some pretty good estimates of, well, if I hire this many sales guys, they're going to be able to reach out to this many businesses. Their close rate's going to be this. This is the revenue that we're going to generate. So it's a lot more predictable, and it's kind of like a rinse and repeat machine. Whereas with B2C, it is quite a bit more difficult because you don't really know how consumers are going to react, and it is a little bit harder to try and get predictability in terms of getting to scale. The good thing though is with B2C, you can A/B test a lot faster, right? So with B2B, maybe you have like 100 clients. So if you have an idea and you want to change your dashboard to do something, it has to be a little more of a strategic product decision. Whereas for B2C, you can very quickly just throw up two different versions of it, A/B test it, look at the data, and then make a decision. Both businesses are hard. I do find that B2C is a little bit more fun, just because, in general, when you meet people, like you can explain what you do and they understand what you do, and you can have your family and your friends use your service, which is great. But they're both fun and interesting. They both have their pros and cons.
Yeah, so it's really not about whether you're selling to businesses or consumers. It's more how you operate the company and what,
Yeah, there's different metrics. There's different. Either way, you got to have a great product. You got to have a great team, right? I think where B2B and B2C differ, it's mainly in top of funnel. Whereas B2B, your top of funnel is hiring sales guys, and B2C, your top of funnel is marketing spend, right? So, like, what do you enjoy more? Do you have strength in marketing spend? Maybe a B2C company is interesting to you. If you have strength in like hiring sales guys and building sales teams and processes, maybe a B2B company is better for you. But at the end of the day, you have to have a great product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because great product means good retention.
Good retention, yeah.
That's the key.
And yeah, when you bring people in, they actually convert, and you drive revenue, and they stay, and they keep using it, and they refer their friends. So all that's important, whether it's B2B or B2C.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Last bonus question.
Sure.
What has been the best advice that you've been ever given, business related?
I think I'll go back to staying focused. I think that's super, super important. I think I see way too many companies who try and do too many things. Even on the B2B side, you have one person who wants a certain feature, and then you go, spend all your time building that feature. So I think staying focused is by far the most important thing. There's always a million things that you can be doing. So staying focused as a company in terms of strategy, and even staying focused as a CEO, like knowing what's the most important thing I need to get done, what's the most important thing for me to get done this week, this month. I think that's super important. So I think staying focused is probably the biggest piece of advice I've received, and I would give to everyone who's listening in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Hussein, thank
you
so much.
All right.
This was really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.